So this is our last week thinking about these encounters that Jesus had around the Sea of Galilee, and obviously today it's on the Sea of Galilee. Next week we start our series called Revealed in Red. Some versions of the Bible print the words of Jesus in red to make them stand out, and so we're going to think about some of the incidents at the end of John's Gospel as Jesus is going towards the cross, because as we think in the run-up to Easter, some of the things that Jesus said and their significance for us as he knew that he was going to his death. And so we want to learn what he was thinking and how he was feeling and what it means for us. But today we're thinking about this incident with Jesus walking on the water. And most people don't like storms. I know there are some people, you've seen them on the TV, they're out there, they're trying to get photos and all of that kind of stuff. They're the oddballs. Right? Most of us don't do that. But there's something, I do get the attraction. There's something really powerful and attractive. We used to go and sit in the car when we were in the Western Isles, and you get the waves crashing in over the cliffs and all that kind of stuff. And there is something attractive about it. But most people don't really like storms, particularly if there's thunder and lightning. We tend to kind of shy away from that kind of thing. I don't know if you've ever been out and it's been a whiteout. And you can't see anything. You're totally disorientated because you just can't get up or down or any of that kind of stuff. And so storms can be really quite frightening. And it's not just weather-related things that I'm thinking about today. There are other storms that hit, storms of life. That there are physical things, emotional things. There are spiritual things that come and they just hit us out of the blue, and they cause us to have this kind of reaction to them, because something about it has caused us to think and to reassess and to wonder. They make us ask questions. Quite often the first one is, why me? Why is this happening to me? Or maybe we think, well, where am I going? What is this about? What is my future? Is there a bigger purpose to life? And if there is a bigger purpose to life, then what's my part in it? All of that kind of stuff. Sometimes it makes us wonder if actually there is anything beyond what we know and see and can reason. You know, is life more than simply growing up and getting an education and getting married and maybe having a family, buying a house, working for 40 years until you've got enough money to retire if you ever get there these days, and then, growing old and die. Do you know, is that it? Is that really all there is? Well, I think as Christians we would say no. There's so much more to it than that. But as a minister, I go and I speak to people, and people who have ignored God for their whole life, and something happens to them, and the first thing they do is blame God. That's the kind of reaction that people have. It brings out real questions, deep and significant questions and issues for lots of people. The disciples were struggling, we're told, in this storm. They had been rowing for a long time, and they were getting nowhere. And sometimes life kind of feels like that. We're doing and doing and doing and doing, and we're getting nowhere. Jesus, had sent them off, and I suppose in one way they were being obedient. But I wonder if it would have been different if they had said, do you know what? We're not going without you. If you're going up that mountain to pray, we're going up that mountain to pray. What difference would it have made to this if they had actually just said, no, we want to be with you? And what difference would it make in our community if we said, do you know what? We're going to do what Jesus did. More and more often, we're going to do what Jesus did and see the difference it makes. But they're in the storm and they're struggling, and there are three things I want to kind of highlight from this. The first of them is, no matter how you feel in the storm, you are not alone. No matter how you feel in the storm, you are not alone. Some people are haunted by this thought that they are alone. I was listening to a program, I just caught a bit of it on the TV, and it was about the universe. And how vast the universe is. And they had some fantastic pictures from the Hubble telescope. And they were talking about, the fact that we see this light, we're actually going back in time because it happened millions of years ago and all that. And it was brilliant, really fascinating. But what they said was, it has made people, this scientific knowledge, the increase of it and thinking about space has made people question faith. Because if the universe is that big, how can God be bigger? How can God hold all of that together? And so they've begun to question faith. And then other people think, well, in the middle of all of that, we're on our own. There's only us. And so they begin to have a fear and anxiety about being alone in the vastness of the universe. But even in our world, we know that, yes, there are people who are alone, but they're not lonely. But we also know that there are many people who always have company, who always have people around, and yet they are lonely. They're crying out for contact, for relationship, and they're finding it really difficult. And what we find often is that it is the storms of life, the tragedies, the guilt, the depression, loss, betrayal, sickness, redundancy, whatever it is, it's the storms of life that raise questions that point to the fact that there is something beyond this life. There is something beyond our understanding. There is someone, as Christians we would say, who is out there and who is in control. But for lots of people, it's only when they come to these storms that the questions begin to be asked. See, if this world really is all there is, if we really are only here as some random throw of the evolutionary dice, and we really are all alone in the vastness of the universe, and there is no bigger plan, then there is no hope. There's nothing better to look forward to. This is as good as it gets. I think that's a message of despair. And it's not what we're about as God's people. The second thing is that the storms of life expose our fears. They thought they saw a ghost and they were terrified. Isn't it remarkable that seeing Jesus was more terrifying than the storm? Do you know? Sometimes as Christians, we say to people, oh, come to Jesus, have an experience of Jesus, as if somehow that's a great thing. And don't get me wrong, it is a great thing. But somehow we think it's going to be nice and easy and gentle. God isn't like that. Always. When you read through the Bible and you see times when God met people, they're terrified. That's often the very first reaction. They are frightened. When the angels appeared to the shepherds, they were terrified. When God appeared to Gideon in the threshing floor, he was terrified. That is often the first reaction that people have when they have an encounter with God, is fear. Because God is awesome. God steps into our situation and our circumstances in ways that we don't expect. And it's terrifying. But at the end of the day, he says, don't be frightened, because I'm with you. You know, it may start off one way, but it ends up another way. Take courage, Jesus says to them. Well, that's easier said than done. You're there in the storm, the boat's going every which way, there's thunder and lightning and rain and wind and all of that kind of stuff, and Jesus is there walking on the water and he says, it's okay, don't be frightened. I think frightened is what I would be, but don't be frightened. But Mark also then goes on to tell us why they were frightened. They were frightened, he says, because their hearts were hard. Now, it's the same phrase that's used in the book of Exodus about Pharaoh. When Moses comes and he does the miracles that God allows him to do, Pharaoh, we're told, has a hard heart. And it's the same phrase, it's the same idea that is used here. But the thing is, these were not foreigners. These were not people who had no faith or no understanding of God. They're not the scribes, they're not the Pharisees, they're not the religious people, they're not skeptics. These are the disciples. These are people who have been with Jesus. These are people who have seen the miracles. They're people who have walked with him and talked with him and lived with him. These are the people who should have known better. they're you and me. And we're told they didn't understand because their hearts were hard. Mark, recognizing that they thought they were different, they were special, they had this knowledge, this relationship. But actually, they were no better than Pharaoh. Just as Pharaoh should have seen the miracles that God was doing through Moses and responded, acknowledging that God, it was God, and let the people go. So he's saying the disciples had enough information to recognize who Jesus was. And they didn't. And then you get that daft wee phrase that's in there, because they hadn't understood about the loaves. Right? Now, we're in the middle of the sea, we're in the middle of the storm, and you think, well, what have the loaves got to do with anything? They'd be soaking by now. But the point is, they've just come from this miracle where Jesus has said, let's feed all these people. And the disciples go, well, we don't have any food and we don't have any money to buy food. There's no way we can do that. And Jesus takes 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he feeds all of these people with enough left over for 12 baskets to be filled. They've seen that, and they should have thought back to the time in the desert when the people had no food, and they were grumbling at Moses, and Moses went to God and said, the people have no food. What are we going to do? And God said, I will give them food. So when they were in desperate need, the food was provided, and God gave them manna as they wandered through the wilderness. And here are people who are in desperate need of food, and they've seen God give the food to the people. But they don't make the connection. They hadn't understood about the loaves. You see, there's actually the connection between these two stories is that in one, the people needed food. And in the other, the disciples needed calm. And it was Jesus that provided both, because he's able to meet any need. So God gives us an opportunity sometimes when these things happen to reevaluate our lives and our attitudes and our priorities. When things are going well, you know, we often say that we don't really worry unduly about money or about prestige or about our jobs, our status, our power, our looks. You know, they're not that important to us. But when the storm comes and we begin to lose some of these things, it gives us an opportunity to work out if actually the reality is some of them have become much more important to us than God. And storms do that. They're able to do that because they bring to the surface the lie that we can manage, that we are in control of our own lives and our own destiny. We can handle whatever life throws at us. That we are masters of our own destiny. And it's not true. Why is the church in the global south, the poorest countries, the least developed countries, why is it growing so quickly? It's growing almost as quickly as it did at Pentecost. Hundreds of thousands of people coming to faith in God year on year. Thousands day by day coming to know God. Why is that when in the West the church seems to be dying? Well, I want to suggest that one of the reasons for that is that in the West we can insulate ourselves from lots of the storms of life. Affluence, education, social care, pensions, good health service, all these things help to insulate us from the storms of life. And that reinforces the lie that we are in control. And if we are in control, we don't need God. But in countries where there are none of those things, the only person you have to turn to is God. The only person who can meet your need is God. Because there's nothing else. The truth is, we are not in control. Thousands of people will wake up today not realizing it's their last day on earth. And they have no control over that. None of us know where our next heartbeat or our next breath is coming from. The financial crisis that we've gone through has caused so many people to reevaluate their priorities and what they're putting their hope in. No, we are not in control of our lives. Of course, we can make decisions that affect and influence it. Of course we can. But ultimately, we are not in control. Our fears about these things keep us from God. And they cause us to do things that are unhealthy and unhelpful and even sometimes destructive. For example, there's a fear of rejection. The need to be liked or loved causes us sometimes to compromise ourselves. It causes us to gossip. Actually, gossip often is as a result of a fear of rejection. We want to be liked. We want people to think better of us. And sometimes we talk other people down to make ourselves look good. Or to show how important we are because we have knowledge and information that they don't have. And so they think better of us. But actually, it's back to the hard heart. Fear of failure causes us sometimes to live unbalanced lives. Always working, sacrificing things, always doing things, but never seeming to get anywhere. You see, the hard heart stubbornly holds on to the idea that we can find peace and security in something other than God. Many people live with the fear that a storm is going to come and take away those things that are important to them, and haven't yet understood that peace and security comes through faith in Christ. Lastly, Jesus uses the storms to set us free from our fears. The things that you the things that you fear can end up shaping your lives. And I want to give you an example from my own life. It's a fairly insignificant thing in many ways. But when I was, I can't remember, 7 or 8, around about that, I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing. I was running at the swimming pool, and I fell, and I split my head. And you know when you get water and you get a wee drop of blood in it and it spreads everywhere? Right? Well, I remember my dad carrying me along the side of the swimming pool in Kilmarnock, and I'm looking back over his shoulder, howling, and seeing what seemed to me to be blood absolutely everywhere, because it was spreading out in the water. It wasn't really that bad. I had a couple of stitches, it was fine. But, and I've got a little bald patch to show for it. However, that made me terrified of ice and snow, of anything slippy. And I do the very thing that you're not supposed to do. You tense up and you go rigid and you kind of looking like that because, And for years, this fear of slippy affected my life. It got to the point where we had children and they would go skiing and I would sit and read a book. Because there was no way I was going on snow. Just wouldn't do it. Got to the point where I realized one day, this is stupid. I'm an adult, And I went and took snowboarding lessons. And now I have been snowboarding and been on the snow and done all that, and it's fine. It's not my favorite thing in the whole world, but actually it's okay. Because I confronted that fear, that thing that was kind of holding me back from it. Now, that's a simple thing, but it did have an effect on my life and things that we were able to do together as a family. But what if it's the fear of rejection that has a strong grip on your heart? Then you become more likely to compromise relationships to get approval. What if it's the fear of failure that has a strong grip on your heart? You're more likely to adjust your values and your standards accordingly. What if it's the fear of being without financial resources that has a strong grip on your heart? Then you're more likely to do almost anything you can in order to amass wealth. And as you do that, you cannot be a truly generous person because it's money and possessions that are your driving force. Things you fear losing end up shaping your life. And God says that unless we repent and allow our hearts to be shaped and molded like His, then we can never really have rest. Unless we love Jesus more than these other things, we'll never really truly escape from our fears. And then you get that tiny wee phrase in there, he was about to pass them by. It's not that in the waves going up and down, he had somehow lost sight of the boat. It wasn't that he was ignoring them. Mark, again, is going back into the Old Testament to a situation that arose in Exodus chapter 33 when Moses is up the mountain. He's speaking to God, and God has said, yes, I'm confirming you're going to lead the people to the promised land. And Moses said, well, do you know, I can't do that on my own. If you would just let me see you, then that'll convince me. And God said, you know, you can't do that. It would be too much for you. It would kill you. But what I will do is I'll put you in this wee cleft in the rock and I'll walk past. I will pass by and you'll see my glory. And that's what's happening here. Jesus is about to pass by. He was giving them the opportunity to see his glory, to see who he really was, to really understand what he was about and what was happening. But their hearts were hard and they didn't get it. They didn't see him. They missed it. And then Jesus gets in the boat and he calms the storm. It's almost as if Mark is saying to his audience, you're afraid of the storm, but perhaps you should be afraid of the one that the storm is afraid of. You know, there is one who is greater than the storm, and maybe it's him you should be focusing on. We talked about Peter getting out of the boat. That's in the version of this story is recorded by Matthew in chapter 14, where Peter gets out and he walks in the water. Only two people have ever done that, Jesus and Peter. It's an amazing thing to imagine that you would get out and walk on the water. And as long as Peter focused on Jesus, he was fine. But as soon as he started to think about the wind and the waves and the storm, he began to sink. And he ended up shouting, Lord, save me. And Jesus stretched out his hand and saved him. But then at the end of Mark, he recounts a story where Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's praying. Do you know, essentially he's doing what Peter did. He's saying to God, save me. Save me from this storm. Save me from having to go through this that I know is coming. Save me from that. But this time there was no hand that was stretched out in rescue. This time Jesus was left to sink into the place of judgment, effectively taking our place, effectively dealing with the sin and the consequences that we understand as in our lives. But in doing that, he opened up the possibility of salvation, mercy, grace, love, and peace. Jesus went through that storm rather than be rescued from it. But it means that he understands what it is to be human, to go through these storms of life and to come out the other end. He understands. And so he can say to us, don't be afraid, because I am with you. Do you know, I think there's probably two groups of folk here today. At least two. There are those of you who are in a storm, and you know that you're in a storm. But you know that Jesus is there with you, walking beside you through it. But then there are other people, and you're in a storm and you don't even know. You feel that you're in control of your life. But that very thought is causing you to sink, and you've not realized. Well, if that's you, then God is still saying, just cry out. Ask for my help. Ask for my presence. Ask for my peace. Ask for me. And I will be with you. Even today, Jesus knows our weaknesses, our faults, our failings, and offers us forgiveness, offers us hope for the future, offers us life in all its fullness. He longs that we would experience his grace, his mercy, his peace. All we need to do is ask, and it's ours.